Settings working, and we're live. Okay, sweet. All right, welcome to Zoomy again to another week of Pokey Talk. As always, I am Eli at Pokemart USA. So just a couple things to start off by saying was we originally were gonna only do one video last week because of the holidays and Christmas being on Friday, and so we did a recording for Wednesday so that we could at least have content to get out. And come to find out that the audio source for Nizumi wasn't working on my end, and he asked if I just wanted to do a pre-recording, and so he didn't have any saved file to send me, and so I absolutely screwed the pooch. However, this time I figured it all out, and so we're gonna try it again, and we're just gonna run our third talk um, on the same exact topic, so you're not missing out on anything anyways.
Yep. It's pretty unfortunate, but at least we can still get the same content out there. Maybe we'll say it better this time around.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not something I hope that happens again. Man, it's just been audio issues for the past couple of videos, so definitely feeling like it's now dialed in. It's just weird because um I use Streamlabs, and every so often when I go into Streamlabs, I have to reset everything because it just doesn't work when I start it. So
Mhm.
it sucks, but it looks like this time around everything stayed in place, so we should be good to go on that. So, but let's not talk anymore about that. Let's talk about what our topic is for the day, which is grading and graded cards, grading services, just everything that has to do with grading in the world of Pokemon. Um, I guess I'm just as I always do. I'm gonna have you start and just kind of give a couple of your thoughts on the grading companies, specifically the top three.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, our topic today is grading, and whenever you talk about card grading, I feel like there's always the big three that I like to kind of refer to them as, and that those big three are PSA, Beckett, and CGC, which are probably some terms or names that you know of. I'd hope if you at least have some sort of investment in this hobby. And the reason why it's the big three is because those are the most well known names, but each of them kind of have their own like pros and cons. Obviously, out of those three, if you barely touch the field, I think most of all you're going to know what PSA is. Maybe you'll know what Beckett is, but CGC, even though it's part of that big three, as I keep saying, it's kind of more of the lesser known out of those top companies. But basically, at the end of the day, all of them do the same thing. You send in your cards, they grade them, they give you a grade back, and it kind of increases the overall value of your card rather than it just being raw. So if you want to go ahead and give your thoughts.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I definitely think CGC is definitely the smaller of the two. So maybe big three wasn't the right word. The three most popular grading companies, in my personal opinion, I feel like CGC has become more popular for sure. Um, but I feel like going into a breakdown as far as it goes of what the pluses and the minuses are of going to each different one, because obviously you're going to get a different level of service, whether it be return time, whether it be overall the way in which the slabs appear, whether it be the economic value. So I guess starting off with PSA, I feel like the first thing about PSA is it's kind of the king. It's the one that's been around the longest. It's the one people see as the most recognizable. It has a really clean slab. So the benefits of going with PSA specifically are just because it's just known. It's a known commodity. It's been around. It's one that people are very familiar with, and it's just the most popular one, I would say, for the Pokemon grading community. Um, I would say obviously as it stands right now, the downsides are currently that you're seeing turnaround times of 100 plus days when it comes to sending in your cards if you're just doing general bulk services. So that's kind of the reason why we're breaking down multiple of these grading companies, because the turnaround times are so heavy. You want to have those options, but also kind of weigh it out on what works best for you. So, when it comes to PSA, in my opinion, if you're someone who wants to get the fullest out of your economic value, because PSA is king and it has been around for a while, I would definitely, and you don't mind waiting that time, unless you're of course using Express, which is super expensive, but um, then I would say definitely PSA is the number one for you to go with. I mean, for me personally, I use PSA. The only time I would really use any other one, such as BGS, is if I'm going for a pristine 10, because I feel like with BGS, a lot of the reason why people tend to it's very people are very torn on it. Um, People tend to not like it. Some people tend to like it. It's the half grades. It's like the 9.5. It's the 8.5s. Like it's that a lot of people are driven away because they just want that clean number that typically you get from PSA. And so a lot of people are driven away from that, on top of the fact of the matter that if you do hypothetically get like a 10 at PSA, right? And then you get a 9.5 at BGS, that 10 is going to hold a lot more value over
Mhm.
at PSA than it would at BGS. So I guess the real thing would be is going, like I said before, is for those pristine 10s at BGS, because when it comes to the economic value of it, definitely going with BGS is one I would definitely choose. But I think that's really if you're trying to make that gamble on doing just the overall pre-grading that you need to do for sending it in. Just making sure that you at least feel confident enough that you're looking at your card and you're saying to yourself, wow, this is perfect centering, this is perfect corners, this is perfect surface, and sending it in, because that's something that's very important in my opinion. And then lastly, CGC, I feel like, to be honest with you, I feel like the biggest appeal for them right now is just their turnaround times, because they're not as backed up as the other two, big PSA and BGS. Um, they, in my opinion, they don't have the prettiest slabs. Some people like them. I personally don't. When it comes to the overall market value that they command, with their graded slabs, it's very low because they're still newer and they're not as well known around the block like PSA and BGS. Um, and so you're definitely going to take a hit from an economic purpose. So if you're just a collector and you're trying to get your card graded quickly, I think CGC is definitely one that I would look into. However, if you are just someone who is trying to get your cards graded and you're seeing it as a long-term form of an investment, or just something that you want to flip, if that's kind of your MO, then I don't see the problem waiting for PSA, depending upon how long you want to wait, because you're going to get the most out of it economically compared to if you were to go with CGC, or like I said before, BGS, if you're going for that pristine 10. So, because although the waiting times suck right now, I feel like economically speaking, it's worth it. And I know for me personally, I've sent over like 200 plus cards off to PSA, and a lot of the card's value has already doubled since it's been waiting there. And now, obviously, there's no guarantee that it's going to keep that way by the time I get it back. But what that is to say is, for me, it's been something personally that's been worth it waiting, because I don't see the need to quickly turn around the cards and need to get that grade, especially considering I think the slabs on PSA look a lot cleaner anyway. But anyway, all right, now you can go on it. So I just kind of went off.
No worries. No, I think you pretty much like hit every single like major point as for pros and cons for each. And yeah, I think overall, in my opinion, I think PSA probably is going to be the king, or is the king, and is going to be the king for a while. I think Beckett kind of it's a definite Beckett's definitely a second place, and I think it could overtake PSA as like the premier like grading service. It's just that everyone kind of, when you think of Beckett, you usually think that they have much stricter standards for their cards, which is why you usually get those nines and 9.5s, 8.5s, as opposed to like you could more likely get a PSA 10 or a 9. At least that's what I've heard. Of course, I personally have not sent in any cards to be graded, so everything I say is just based on information that I've seen and information that I've been told. But like you mentioned, big pro for Beckett is that black label, and that black label is it's PSA doesn't have an equivalent. Like you can get a Gem Mint 10, but I think anyone who understands the differences between PSA and Beckett will understand that that black label kind of commands a higher respect and a higher value than just a PSA 10 would. which I think is a very good contender for why you'd want to send your cards to Beckett. But you do also have to consider that their standards are going to be stricter, and there are those half grades. And another thing that I don't think you fully mentioned or fully touched on is just Beckett has all those subgrades, which it could be something that a lot of people don't like. Me personally, I think it's kind of nice. It kind of gives me an indicator of just like, okay, why did this card get a lower grade than I was hoping for? And at the end of the day, I'm gonna be butthurt that it got a low grade, but it's still kind of a nice little touch that PSA doesn't have. I think CGC does have something like that, and also something you didn't mention about CGC is that they're not too big with the cards community, but I do know that like they were, I'm pretty sure the premier like comics grading, because there's a lot of grading in the comic scene, which I thought was pretty interesting. I didn't know that for a while, but when I found out, it kind of introduced me to CGC as a whole. But yeah, like you said, PSA definitely the top of the top. If you think you have a 10, Beckett is probably a really good place to look into. Black Label 10 is probably the best you can get. And then CGC, if you just want the fastest turnaround times right now, CGC is your way to go. And of course, if you're just a pure collector, I think there's also kind of an idea of like, is it even worth it to even think about um, grading at all? Because grading is I would say a fairly hefty investment, especially if you're sending in a lot of cards, because that price for just getting everything graded is going to rack up if you send more and more cards in. But you also have to consider what am I getting this card graded for, right? And that kind of ties into what we're going to move into, is just what is it worth to grade my cards. So if you're looking at this as an investor or as just a pure collector, I think there's a lot of points for each. Obviously, as an investor, getting these cards graded, like you could just look up the raw price of any card, right? And then look at that card in a PSA 10, and you're going to see that there's almost guaranteed going to be a humongous like increase, like sometimes two, like even sometimes up to 10 times. Like it's kind of insane how much they increase, and it's because once it's been reviewed by those professionals, those people who know what they're doing, it kind of increases the inherent value just because their card is nicer in a way. So as an investor, most of the time, I will say it's definitely worth to grade your cards, unless you're just going to take a huge hit right now. Which I honestly, I don't think there's ever a situation where it's not worth it as an investor. As a collector, that's where I'm kind of more on the edge about. Because me personally, I'd love to get some of my favorite cards graded, right? Maybe partly because it's gonna give it more investment value in the long term, but also because I think it'd be a lot cooler to have a PSA 10 Rainbow Pikachu like as a collector's item. But at the same time, if I'm just gonna collect them, I'm not gonna sell them, or at least I won't sell them until I'm old and gray, which is very very long time from now. But if I'm just collecting those items just for myself, then there's also nothing wrong with just like sleeving it up, getting a nice fit sleeve for it, putting it in a binder, and just leaving it there. Because as long as it's protected, which is another thing, the cards will be fairly protected in their cases. But as long as your card is protected, it's you're basically getting the same thing. It's just either in a binder sleeve or it's in a plastic case. So it just comes down to you as a collector whether or not you really care about the grading as a whole, and whether or not in the future, in the far far future, you see yourself grading this card or selling it as a graded piece.
Yeah, no. So you bring up a lot of good points. So first thing, you're right. I completely missed the subgrades. To me personally, I really do like subgrades, especially the way in which BGS does it. I think it looks really clean, the way in which they present it on their labels. So I definitely think that's something I enjoy, because a lot of people do have the questions of like, why did I get a 9.5? Why did I get a 10? And so having that basically like that explanation on the front of it is it's a really good explanation in my personal opinion, by just saying you have a 9 centering or you have a 9.5 at corners. Um, and then as far as it goes, like I said before, you brought up some good points on like why are you sending it in to be graded. There are obviously collectors that are like, I want to collect PSA graded cards, or I want to collect every condition of PSA graded cards. I know there are people that will literally be like, I want to collect base set Charizard in 1 through 10 PSA grade, or there's some
Mhm.
people that like, I just want to get a PSA Charizard, just doesn't matter to me. Or I have a card that I want to keep around for a long term, and I don't want to keep it in a binder, so I would much rather just keep it in a slab and just have it graded. So it's like those are the motivations for you to send them in, versus if you're someone who's like, I want to have it where it's a presentation, I can put it in a binder, then I don't see why you have to send it in. And as long as you're taking the proper precautions to make sure the card in and of itself is in good condition, and you yourself don't plan on selling it, and you're seeing it as something that you're just collecting long term, and maybe eventually, like several years down the road or several decades down the road, you're like, okay, I want to grade it now, then you can always send it in then, because there's no rush as a collector. Obviously, there's a different incentive if you're an investor, and whether it be long term or short term, because everyone has different incentives as far as why they're getting their cards graded. And so the question I guess you just got to ask yourself is, why am I sending in my cards to be graded? And is it worth it for me based on what I'm looking for?
Yeah, no, that's definitely something good to look at. Just like look at yourself and what you want to do with these cards, and just ask yourself like, is it really worth it? Do I really want to get these cards graded? Which, there's nothing wrong with not getting them graded, and there's nothing wrong with choosing to get them graded. You can, at the end of the day, if you bought the cards, they're yours. You can do whatever you want with them. And we're just two guys just trying to give the best advice we can. But I guess that's a good time to just kind of move into our next kind of part, which is just kind of elaborating more so on like what cards should you want to grade, because a lot of people just from a base level are like, is this card worth grading? Like you pull a Charizard V, looking at it, is it worth a grade? Or just in a more general scheme, like what cards exactly should I grade? Like should I grade older cards? Should I grade newer cards? um, should I grade like beat up cards? Should I grade perfect cards? I guess I'll let you go ahead and start it off if you want.
Yeah, no. So I feel like what cards, I feel like it's super broad on what cards are worth grading, to be honest. So first things first, as a collector, it does this question shouldn't matter to you, because if hypothetically speaking, you're saying to yourself, I want to collect 100 commons from Champions Path set, and you're saying I just want to collect every single one of the commons, then go for it. No one's stopping you. That's your own prerogative. That's something you're doing as a collector. I don't think there should be any form of like grade this, grade that, because it's a collection piece. It's not something that you're planning on turning around as a form of investment. So I just want to get that out of the way. Now, as far as it goes from an investment perspective, I feel like um, when it comes to a lot of the modern products specifically, I want to be very clear on that. Um, I think you're shooting for nines and tens, and more specifically, just purely tens, to be honest with you. I have a Rainbow Rare Charizard that I pulled myself, and I think it's going to get a 9, so I haven't sent it in. And to be honest with you, the reason why is because, for me personally, I don't intend on keeping that card. I intend on selling it. And so I feel like there's a lot more of a downside getting your card turned in and it ends up being a 9. Like a perfect example of why that would be a bad idea is, so one of my buddies pulled a shiny GX Charizard from the Hidden Fate set, right? And the card itself I think is going for in PSA 10 like $1,500. And like the card itself is being sold in PSA 9 for like 500-600 bucks, something like that. And the ungraded card itself is going for around the same price. And so why would I want to spend the money and the time to get the card graded if I know I'm not going to get a 10 out of it? Now, granted, you can always take that risk if you say to yourself, I think the centering's off, but I still have possibility of getting a 10 just based off of, if the grader is not on one that day. So it's one of those things where it's like you can always take that risk, but unless you're looking at getting at least a 9, I don't think it's worth getting any of your vintage graded from an investment perspective, purely because the market value is held just as high if the card is pack fresh ungraded, because people are willing to pay the money to take that risk in case it just so happens to be a 10. Um so outside of that, I would definitely say if you're talking a lot older cards, a lot more vintage, and like I said before, I've discussed it, vintage, it leads all the way down to black and white era. I definitely think it's worth it getting cards graded, specifically the ones that hold the highest premium, and that could be the Charizard cards, that could be the Pikachu cards, the starter cards, and to be honest with you, it can also be a lot of just the popular chase cards during that time. So a perfect example, because I keep saying that, uh, would be the Shiny Star Mew. So I remember the other day I was looking at it on eBay. I saw one of them sold for like $150, and it was pretty beat up. It was like it had creases on it. The whitening was pretty bad, and in my eyes, I'm like, this is maybe a PSA 2 or 3 if you're lucky. And also, that same day, a PSA 1 sold for $300. And so the question you have to ask yourself is why is it that the PSA 1 still, sold for so much money considering the fact of the matter that it's PSA 1? Well, when it comes down to it, a lot of people that don't have a ton of money still want to be able to hold that card, and they still want to be able to have that card in their hand when it comes to them collecting it. And so for that reason, it's always, in my opinion, worth it to get the chase cards graded, even if they're in terrible condition, purely because the market value for them is still going to stay true at the end of the day, because there's always going to be a collector for that specific card as it gains value and price. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I want a base set first edition Shadowless Charizard. Just, it doesn't matter if it's a PSA 1, it doesn't matter if it just came out of the blender. Like, they want it because they want to say that they have that card. And so if they can buy that card ungraded, that's sweet for them. If they want to buy that card graded at a PSA 1, they're stoked about it. Heck, the other day I just saw that they were offering a PSA 3 Venusaur first edition Shadowless for, I think it was going for like $2,000, how much I saw it sold for, something crazy like that. And so when it comes down to it, it's something to definitely understand that it's still worth it being graded if you do have one of those old super duper rare sought after cards, because people still want to buy that card at the end of the day. And since a lot of them are in such low population compared to a lot of modern, um, where you're seeing like thousands of PSA 10s versus you're only seeing tens to hundreds of PSA 10s in a lot of older stuff. I definitely recommend getting those cards that are, like I said before, considered the popular chase cards back during that era, because they will still hold a premium for getting graded.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. I think bringing up the concept of chase cards, which everyone should understand just what a chase card is and what it means. Like for Vivid Voltage, obviously the chase card is the Rainbow Pikachu, but pretty much almost every set has its own chase card. Now, some sets obviously have a more valuable chase card than others. Like an older set like Emerging Powers, the chase card is like a full art Tornadus, and I think it's like $13, right? Compare that to nowadays with like a $300 Pikachu, right? It is a clear difference. But people who opened those packs when they were smaller, or I should say when they were younger. I don't know why I said smaller, but when they were younger, and those are the packs that they grew up on. Those are the cards that they were chasing at the time, right? So now I chase a Pikachu. If I had never gotten a Pikachu, say 10 years down the road, I'd look back on opening Viv Voltage fondly, right? And I'd be like, man, I really wish I had gotten that Rainbow Pikachu. So I would look into it. I would look into how to buy it, and that's why that kind of market of nostalgia kind of keeps going, and especially with graded cards, because it's a lot easier just to buy a card either raw. I think everyone can agree that buying singles is almost always more cost effective than opening packs, because your chances of getting that chase card that you want out of opening packs is way beyond what you would end up paying for just buying it as a single. But like at the end of the day, people, like you said, they're gonna want those cards. So especially if you can get a raw, that's one thing. But if you can get them graded as well, it's kind of people kind of are drawn to that, in my opinion. Yeah, but chase cards from vintage up till nowadays, they all have that kind of intrinsic value as being the card that people want. But like you said, you said a really important word, which is population, and that kind of ties into population report, which plays a much bigger factor nowadays, I think. Just because of how many cards there are on the market. Because obviously, I feel like we're going to mention this in every podcast we have, but the Logan Paul effect, which is just the fact that he streamed his base set opening, and now like millions of people around the world are back in on Pokemon and kind of understand more of the market. So everyone is pulling their cards, everyone's getting their champions at the Red Voltage, opening their packs, sleeving up all the ultra rares they get, and as more and more people do that, there's going to be more and more Charizards that are being sleeved and then being sent off to PSA. Like a couple years back, I would definitely say that there's not as many people doing it now. Like clearly, there was not as many people who would sleeve their cards and send them off to be graded as there are now. But it plays a really big important factor into the prices of these cards and how it kind of affects the market. Especially, it's not going to take effect immediately because obviously, as you know, PSA does have a huge backlog. But once all those cards that PSA goes through and they kind of finally come back, and then people kind of flood the market with that, I think there's going to be a definite change in price. In my opinion, I think the prices for a lot of those chase cards, especially right now, with the sets of like Vivid, Champions Path, and maybe even some more Sword and Shield era sets, I think a lot of those prices are honestly going to go down for a bit. But I think eventually the market will kind of stabilize and just kind of go back up, and just kind of return to a more like suitable and more stable position. But that is something to keep in mind, and that's why it's kind of always almost always more worth it to grade vintage cards, because vintage cards have been out of print for so long, and especially with people who, with the way Logan Paul kind of tailored his whole thing, and a lot of the big Twitch streamers kind of doing their own thing, they're opening a lot of older vintage packs, which is kind of encouraging more and more people to do live breaks of vintage packs, more and more individual buyers to open vintage packs and open those. So the amount of sealed product for vintage is continuously going down, and it's never going to be able to go back up, as opposed to modern stuff, which is being released in waves. So I think we just recently got the last Champions Path wave. I might be wrong. There might be one more, but like even though it's the last one, right? It was just printed a couple months ago. So the overall stock for how much Champions Path there is in the world is a lot higher than the stock of like even like black and white era stuff. So those cards are, the population for those cards as a whole is going to be a lot lower than the population for modern cards, which is why having one of like the 10 PSA 10 black and white chase cards is a lot more valuable than having one of like 1,000 PSA 10 Charizards from Champions Path.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. When it comes down to it, specifically, like I said, like you were saying, like I was saying, agreeing with you, there's so much higher of a population with the more modern chase cards compared to the vintage, and for that reason, I think it's always worth getting it graded. And to be honest with you, I feel as if there are cards that aren't as popular, but they're still in really good condition, such as a lot of just the base set or first edition cards, you can still always get them graded because there are people that are going to want to collect the full they're going to want to collect the full set. With that being said, I feel like if for that specific for those specific common cards, the ones that aren't uh, the base set starters or the Pikachus, I definitely think you want to keep them 9s and 10s. Um, but they're still worth being graded depending upon their overall population and depending upon the condition you think you're going to get them in. Because that's something where there's still a lot of value in collectors' eyes because they want to complete that full collection of the first edition Shadowless. And I think one thing I want to kind of break down for people, this might be kind of a lot. When it comes to population report, there's this kind of concept that you see in the stock market, you see in gold, you see in just overall economics. And so that is the concept of circulating supply and just a set supply in and of itself. So obviously in an economic system you have a certain number of product. So for example, like the US dollar, we have a set amount of that dollar, and as more and more gets printed, then more and more goes into circulation, and that becomes a circulating supply. Think of it that way in the Pokemon world. We have a certain supply that is currently circulating right now into the population as it stands for specific cards, and the set supply that is on the outside is in a lot of these sealed products that haven't been opened yet. And as more and more of that sealed product becomes to be opened, then you start to see the increase in circulating supply go up, and then the value of the cards, realistically or hypothetically speaking, go down. I feel like that's something a lot of people need to take into consideration. Obviously, we're not looking doomsday scenario. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to see just 10 thousand PSA 10 Charizards just flooding into the market from first edition, and all of a sudden the value is going to plummet. Like, we're still going to be realistic with it, but it's still something to take into consideration when talking about supply versus demand side, because you want to make sure that you know that hypothetically for your specific card, if there were a ton more to come into the market based off of the sealed product, how much would that affect your card? And that's why with modern, it's still being printed for a lot of them. And the ones that are very, very just like barely just now became out of print, then it doesn't make sense for you to try and go for a lot of these lower graded cards. If you're sending it in, you got to go for those 9s and 10s because there still is so much product being open, versus if you're going with obviously the older, more vintage ones where the boxes themselves are so rare that they're going for thousands of dollars because they're so hard to find. Then that's where it's a different story, because you're looking at the population report, and the odds of that changing the overall value of the card is something that you want to take that risk, because from an aggregate side, you're saying to yourself, if hypothetically the supply goes up, it's going to be very minimal, versus the demand will consistently increase, causing the value of the card itself to continue. So that's just kind of how you want to look at it from an economics perspective. And in the lower the population, the better. I mean, Leafeon Level X PSA 10 is in a pop 2. If that card all of a sudden goes to a pop 20, pop 30, it's still such a rare card in and of itself that the demand is going to still, it's still going to dominate the supply. So that's something where I feel like it's a safe investment as far as it goes if you were to want to get that card graded. Same thing, to be honest with you, is if you want to get it graded in like a 6 or a 7 condition. I know personally I sent off a Glaceon, and I think it's maybe going to be a 6 or a 7 if I'm lucky. And to be honest with you, at the end of the day, it's a worthwhile investment, because just the 9 itself is selling for almost $1,000, which is more expensive than most of the other level X chase cards, and that's in 10 condition purely because it's got such a low population. And so for me, if I get a 6 or 7, it's worth at least $100+, and I spent 35 on the card. So that's just like from an economics term, like that's just how I calculated whether it was a investment that was worth it for me based on its overall population. So I feel like that's something that a lot of people really need to take into consideration. And to be honest with you, like right now we're seeing such like a hot market because of such high demand, that because of it, a lot of these cards are hyper overvalued, including like the Pikachu, which is a modern card, and it shouldn't be worth like as much as it is. Like it's worth more than a lot of chase cards that are like 10, 12 years old, and its population is way higher. And so one of the things a lot of people have to take into consideration is, if the market, or when the market settles down, what is going to come after it. And I feel like the demand is going to start dying out, and so the cards that are in very low population, you're going to start to see them either slightly decrease in value or retain a lot of their value, versus a lot of these more modern cards that have a high count in population. I think you're going to start to see their value crash overall, because the demand is not going to be able to keep up with the supply in which they have. And so it's one of these things where it's gonna be a more, necessitable commodity, since the population's a lot higher.
Yeah. I was gonna just joke around and say, do you think then it's just better to sell raw at this point, especially for modern? Just because obviously, like you said, most places outside of CGC, you're going to be looking at a couple, like a long time to get your cards back, and sometimes like we can't fully predict how the market's going to look once all these like, PSA submissions come back in, right? But we can know exactly how much a card that we pulled today is going
Right.
for raw. So, do you think there are situations where it calls for just selling the card pack fresh over like looking at that grading?
I think it really
Especially
depends.
in terms of modern, of course.
Yeah, no, I think it really depends once again on what your purpose is. If you're trying to flip it, to be honest with you, so if you look at a lot of the chase cards that come when the set just comes out, you see all these sales. Like I think the Rainbow Charizard and the Shiny V Charizard both sold for several thousand when they first came out. So if you're saying to yourself, I think I can get a 10. I mean, to be honest with you, the 9 is probably still worth it. Um, and you got the card. You got the card, you pulled it, and you want to sell it right away. Pay and you think you at least got a 9 or a 10. I don't think there's anything wrong with paying that express just to get the turnaround time and flip the card, put it on auction, or put it for a high amount. Because if you look right now, now that the market has started to unsettle itself, the value of the cards have gone down from $2,000+ for a PSA 10 down to like 600 or 700, which is insane how cheap it is in my eyes at least. I feel like it could even go lower depending upon how more people start to really see the Champion's Path as a terrible set, other than the Charizards and how common they are to get. Um, so when it comes to it, if you're looking at like Pikachu, for example, the Pikachu's still going for around $1,300. Now, whether that card is going to sell for less, and I can't tell you the exact numbers of how much it was selling for when it first came out, but if I were to guess, it probably sold for around $2,000 or more, purely based off of when a new set comes out, people want to be the first to grab that PSA 10, and it will hold a premium for that reason, having that population 1 or that population 1 of 10. So I definitely see it being worth it if you're able to quickly turn it around and flip it. However, if it's one of these things that you're going to hold on to and eventually sell, I don't see it being worth it because the market will eventually level itself out as time goes on. So definitely at that point, if you're saying to yourself, I pulled this card, I want to sell it in several months, um, then there's absolutely no problem with you just selling it raw purely because the market value is going to be very, very similar if you pulled it pack fresh to a PSA 9, and you won't have to take that risk comparatively. And so, yeah, no, I think that's definitely a good question because you got to ask yourself what the risk reward is when getting your car graded. And at the end of the day, with the market right now is so high, and the demand typically for the card is so high when the set first comes out. So if you can get that quick turnaround time, you can get it as a 9 or a 10 and get a high profit for it. And to be honest with you, you can even undercut whoever has the highest sold, or you can try and command the market if you're the first one to come out to it and just see what people are throwing offers at for you. And odds are you're going to get a huge premium than what you would if you were to sell the card 1 to 3 months later as more supply starts going into the market.
No, yeah, that was a really good answer to my question. Actually, I hope that helps anyone who has like worries of whether or not they want to just sell this card or not. Because I know I've come to that crossroads before. Just should I sell this card immediately now that I sold it, or should I just keep it, hope that it turns into a worthwhile investment? Yeah, I guess. I mean, we don't know how the market will go. It could go in any direction, but I guess we'll see coming into 2021. I think it'll be a fun year to see. But that also kind of brings me into talking about or wanting coming. This makes me want to talk about my next topic, which I kind of tried to fit into our last recording, which rest in peace, that one didn't go so well. But it's kind of the topic of middlemen, and what I mean by middlemen is just when you're getting your cards graded, especially with like PSA and Beckett, I believe they have sort of memberships, which are not the cheap. It's not a worthwhile investment if you're only sending in cards once or twice. But if you're someone who owns a business, right, and you send in cards like every month or very frequently, it does become more worthwhile. But what these middlemen do is they act as they give you basically a discount because they have their own memberships. So you can send your cards to them, and then some services, like I believe Ludkins, has kind of like a pre-grading, like a service.
Pre-grading service.
So yeah, pre-grading service. So they just kind of look at your cards and they're like, okay, we think it'll get this. So then you can kind of choose whether or not you want to send it. But the biggest benefit of these middlemen is just kind of, you can send your cards to PSA at a little bit cheaper, and you're not really wasting your money by getting a membership to like ensure like a speedy time just for your cards. And I just kind of wanted to get your opinion and kind of see like what you think about it, because I know you've sent cards to PSA obviously, and I believe you sent them in just straight to them.
Yeah, no, so a couple of things to answer that question. So when I sent mine in, I want to say it was back in, so I sent them in June, and they didn't start the actual grading process until August. So think about that. June, July, August, September, October, November, December. It's been about 7 months since I sent it in, because I sent it on the 26th, and it's the 28th right now. So it's been 7 full months since I've sent it in, and so the turnaround time has been absolutely atrocious. I sent in several hundred cards. People are probably going to send in more. So for me personally, it was worth it getting the $250 membership, because I knew to myself that the economic value that I was going to be saving on getting these cards graded, because when you pay for the membership, you get a discount. Not to mention the fact of the matter, the quarterly special was Pokemania, which was $7.50 per card you got graded, which now if you want to send it in, it's $10, so I was saving $250 every card. I saw it as a worthwhile investment. Um, However, the biggest issue I would say I'm seeing right now is, one, the market itself at PSA has gone so crazy that they've stopped offering memberships. And so for that reason, I feel like if you're trying to get your card sent in, I definitely think that looking into these middlemen is not a bad idea. I originally myself had actually looked into going with middlemen such as like Graded Gem, but at the time they had only offered their services in the UK because that's where they're based out of. So I just went with the membership and did everything myself. And of course, a month later, after I sent everything in, they announced that they were coming to the US, and I cried. And so it's one of these things where they will take a little bit off the top. It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, because what they're doing is they're taking their membership and their connections that they have with PSA or these grading services, and they're giving it to you and just taking it off the top. And you, at the end of the day, are still saving a ton of money as if you had the membership and you don't have to fork out that $250. And then on top of that, I know it's changed now, but they had their own, they had like a connection as far as it goes, when it came to PSA. And so what they were able to offer was faster turnaround times than if you were to send it in yourself, because they had a grader that was designated specifically for them, since they were sending in so many cards all at a time. Now, obviously, that's changed, but I think once the market starts to settle down, that'll still be a huge premium when it comes to people wanting their cards to have a very fast turnaround time. So I definitely think that having a middleman is, I like I said before, I was gonna do it myself. So I'd be lying if I said I don't see it as a good form of an investment. Not to mention what you were talking about. So pre-grading. Um, I'm someone who feels pretty confident when it comes to my grading abilities. Obviously, you learn over time, in my opinion, as you get your cards graded and you start to see more cards and what they kind of look for when it comes to what they want for your for the back of the card, and just how the edges are, and how the overall just the expectation that they have when it comes to centering. Um, However, for a lot of people that are very new into the market and aren't as experienced and haven't been dealing with PSA graded cards for as long as I have, or a lot of other people have, they are like, okay, is there anyone I can talk to who can kind of give me their opinion? And so with these pre-grading services, what they're able to do is they're able to say, look, I've turned in 50,000 plus cards into PSA. I've seen, what a PSA 10 can differ from a PSA 9. Obviously, they're not PSA graders, so they won't tell you that it's guaranteed. But what they can say is, based off of my experience, I think the possibility of this card, and they'll give you a range. Like it could be an 8 through a 10 or 9 through a 10, or we're pretty confident it's a 10. Um, and so what they'll typically do is they'll say, you use our service, send your cards, we can pre-grade it for you. If we give you a set amount of pre-grades, and you are saying, I want you to send in the cards that you think are going to be 10, and I want you to return the cards that you think are going to be 8 or 9. Well, you can easily do that, and they'll just charge you the shipping return cost that it's gonna take for you to have, um, for them to take the cards that you sent and have it sent back to you, if that makes sense. Hopefully that doesn't sound confusing. And so, for a lot of newer people, I don't see, I see that as definitely a benefit as the insight as far as it goes when it comes to understanding that graded market. It allows people to like, get the help that they need from these pre-grading services at no charge. Um, and you're getting to use, like I said, their service. And so, yeah, no, I definitely see it as a worthwhile investment and option for those people who don't have the memberships already. Because let's face it, you don't at this point, unless you're trying to go to other grading companies. I don't know if BGS is still offering their memberships. So, but I know for specifically PSA, you can't buy any of the memberships to get that discount. So the only way you're going to be able to get it is through going through these middlemen.
Yeah. I couldn't have better said it better myself, honestly. But yeah, I believe in terms of middlemen, I believe Ludkins and then Graded Gem are the top dogs. And I believe, yeah, I don't really know much about either of their things, more specifics, but I have heard good things and a few bad things about both. But I'm not gonna burn bridges here. But yeah, I think that's kind of just the major topics that we really wanted to talk about with grading. But I just wanted to mention a couple things that I actually learned on my own, which I think a lot of people might not know. But when it comes to grading, I believe PSA does this. I'm not 100% sure on CGC and Beckett, but you can actually grade sealed boosters, which I thought was pretty cool. So you can get you can get a grade on that. I don't know what the exact specifications are, but I'd imagine just how good the art is, whether or not it's all crumpled, if it's open, which I think is a pretty cool thing. So if you're into that, go for it. And I recently found out about another grading service, and I mentioned this in our failed recording, but I couldn't remember exactly who it was. But they're called GMA Grading, and I would honestly, I'm gonna burn this bridge right now because I've seen first off their label is really ugly, and I've seen people get their cards back where it's in the case and the card was still able to just move around and like click against the side of the case inside. So I was just like completely turned away from that. I was like, holy crap, that's really scary to imagine. And it was a 10 too. And actually, I think there I saw another picture of a 10, but you could see some very clear whitening, which I mean, I'm sure that PSA has like a little bit of leeway because I know some people mention like, oh, you can get away with just a little bit of like soft centering, a little bit of whitening, but like this kind of whitening was just completely down the side, and it still got a 10. So yeah, honestly, please don't go to GMA grading.
That's so
But yeah,
funny.
yeah,
Um,
that's pretty much all we really, I think all we really wanted to tackle, unless you have anything else.
Yeah, so I'll you bring something up. So I think that does bring another company up instead, which is VGA actually. Um so for people who do want to get things graded outside of cards, because for me personally, there has obviously been rumors around the Diamond and Pearl remakes. Um and to me, as someone who is a huge Diamond and Pearl fan, especially just Gen 4 era specifically, I would love to get the sealed game graded. And so I haven't done it before, so obviously I can't truly speak on my behalf on the experience, but from the experience of others, from what I've heard, VGA is one of the ones you want to go to. I heard it's a pretty lengthy process based off of just getting the paperwork filled out, but once it's gotten rolling, then it's a pretty quick turnaround time. But if you're someone who wants to get your older games graded, if you do happen to have it still sealed, very highly unlikely. But for just those people who are those collectors, that have their games still sealed that they just held on to, VGA is definitely one I would look into, because a lot of people collect unopened products, and myself included. I eventually plan on collecting some of them. I want to get a VGA gold status Pokemon Platinum because, like I said before, that's one of my favorite. So, and basically, kind of how their grading structure works, it's a scale of 1 to 100, and then they had certain like level rankings based on like gold, silver, and that kind of deal. And so if I'm correct, how it works is 85 is kind of the mark. You can get 85 silver or an 85 gold, and that's kind of the barrier as far as it goes. And so a lot of people will pay a high premium if you have that card in a gold condition. I mean, I've seen some of the like first games on the Game Boy, like Pokemon Emerald in gold condition. That like a gold 90 selling for like $20,000 plus. And so as far as it goes for a long-term form of investment, I mean, I definitely see it being worth it. Platinum golds have gone for $1,500, and that game itself is 12 years old, and you bought it for $40. So it's one of these things where it's like I could see it as definitely a long-term investment, getting these cards or these game graded in their original casing. So I definitely think that's something I wanted to bring up because they shouldn't be left out. Because for those who are investors in the Pokemon market, I definitely see it as being worthwhile when a new game comes out, especially if it's a hot game or a remake, because people will chase um, the nostalgic feeling with a lot of the games.
No, yeah, that's really true. Actually, I'm really glad you brought up VGA because I know a lot of people don't really talk about it, but I personally think that it's really cool as well. I think a lot of those gradings on like those older, like first Nintendo games, like Majora's Mask, Smash Brothers is the first one. I think it's a lot of really cool stuff,
Yeah.
and not a lot of people talk about it, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to bring up, Nizumi?
Um, no, I think we pretty much hit everything and then some that I wanted to really talk about.
Awesome, awesome. Oh, goodness gracious. You know what I just realized? Oh, this totally sucks. I didn't fix the lighting like I did last time on the recording.
Uh,
Some guy asked me about fixing the lighting. In the last recording, I was like, I fixed the lighting, and I forgot to completely fix the lighting this time around. That completely sucks. Oh, that's
Yikes.
tough. That's not that big of a deal. I feel like that's something we could work with next time. But anyway, all right. Thank you everyone for watching. I'll make sure to have everything time-stamped, hopefully within the next couple of hours for those people who are interested in just jumping to certain parts. Um, and then don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay updated on notifications. And then, as always, follow Nizumi on Twitch at Nizumi_. Thanks again, everyone.